Well, good morning. Welcome to the garden. I'm glad you're all here with us today. I know some of you are probably new this morning, so I just always want to say, you never know what you're going to get here, so every Sunday's different, so hang in there with us. Also, last service, I guess I am really a creature of habit. At the end of the service, we usually say, "Go Colts." So we said "Go Colts" at the end of the first service, and it was sort of feeble. I couldn't quite figure out why. Well, the Colts don't play today. Well, duh, sorry about that. But someone up there reminded me that the Broncos and the Chiefs play today. And so I think probably we're going for the Broncos. Yeah? So we won't say "Go Broncos," but just know that's the sentiment when we get to the end of the service. Anyway, glad you're all here this morning for whatever you're going to get. So there was a nationwide survey that was conducted in 2013 by Weber Shandwick and some others that discovered that incivility, that civility is eroding in our country right now, and that rude behavior is the new normal. 70% of Americans said that this incivility that we're experiencing is reaching crisis proportions. Americans said that they encounter incivility on an average of twice a day, and that they fully expect to encounter it again in the next 24 hours. But the surprising thing was 81% of Americans said that this rise in incivility is really contributing to the increase in violence that's occurring in our society. Now, this survey went on to assign blame, and it named the top-ranking pieces. It began with politicians, American youth, it went on to the media, and then it included the internet. Now, this was the first time that the internet and social media had actually risen to the very top of the heap there. And 34% of the blame was assigned to Twitter and what people do on Twitter. Well, the lack of civility seems to be about everywhere we turn, and we don't see much evidence of respect for other people and for the humanity of other people that we encounter. The singer, songwriter, and pseudo-philosopher Emmylou Harris said this: "As citizens, we have to be more thoughtful and more educated and more informed. I turn on the TV, and I see these grown people screaming at each other. And I think, well, if we don't get our civility back, we're in trouble." Well, probably many of us could agree with her. We probably might not use those words, but that is true, that seems to be what we see most of around here. And yes, we see it in the public domain. We see it with our politicians and public officials, and we see it sometimes in families and in friends gathering. And sometimes those things turn into shouting matches or even worse. Now, I suppose it would be helpful to at least define what we're talking about when we use the word civility so that we're all on the same page. In its simplest terms, civility is defined as formal politeness and courtesy in behavior or speech. There's something called the Institute for Civility in Government, which in my mind has a little work to do yet. But anyway, it defines civility like this: civility is claiming and caring for one's identity, needs, and beliefs without degrading someone else in the process. And it goes on to say that politeness is a necessary first step. It's absolutely essential to be at least polite to one another. Now, at the very basic level, what we're talking about here is how we treat one another as people. It has to do with how we see one another. Do we see each other as a human being worthy of our respect? Someone that we can honor in everything that we encounter, whether that's friend or foe. Someone by the name of John Cugley Commonweal said this: "Tolerance implies a respect for another person, not because he's wrong or even because he's right, but because he is human." Probably most of us are familiar with the name Jackie Robinson. He was the first black man to play professional baseball, and we've probably heard about all the catcalls and derision he got when he was playing what had been previously a white man's game. He was asked about that, and he said this: "I'm not concerned with your liking or disliking me. All I ask is that you respect me as a human being." Well, in my mind, that's the problem. Do we really respect one another as human beings? It seems to me that sometimes we forget that each one of us, every single one of us, is a child of God, created by God, loved by God. And every one of us is worthy of dignity and respect from others. That's just simply what it means to be human. Now, one of the first lessons of our faith is how we are supposed to treat one another, how we live together in our communities, and how we live together in our homes, and how we live together in our workplaces. And I think that's what the Apostle Paul is talking about in the Bible passage we have for this morning. He's writing to the people in the church in Rome. And let's look at what he says and then think about it a little bit. Love must be completely sincere. Hate what is evil. Hold on to what is good. Love one another warmly as Christians and be eager to show respect for one another. Now, this passage comes from the 12th chapter of Romans, which is described by some as Paul's Sermon on the Mount. And it's kind of his instructions for how we live together in a civil manner, how we live together in a respectful way. And it's clear that what he believes is the highest virtue that we need to claim and to live is the virtue of love. And love then begets respect. And that's how we live together in good ways. Now, when we talk about respect, we're really talking about taking into consideration someone else's feelings, hopes, dreams, thoughts, issues, all of those kinds of things, and honoring those, and recognizing that they're theirs, and therefore, because they belong to them, they are worthy of our respect. We need to refrain from judging, because if we're in any way judging here while someone is sharing who they are and what they believe and what they think, then probably we don't have room to be respectful. And you can't fake respect. Well, I think it's important to realize that civility and respect are really quite similar, but I think maybe the bedrock of civility is respect. And I think it begins in our families. It begins in our family of origin. It begins in the family structure that we have right now. So maybe we need to ask ourselves some questions about how we're dealing with civility, with respect in our families. For instance, do we always treat each other with politeness and courtesy, everyone who's a part of our family? Do we refrain from interrupting someone who's sharing a story or telling something about themselves and do everything in our power to not interrupt them? Or do we jump in and discredit them or try to upstage someone else? Do we do we try to tell someone else how to handle a situation or what to do in a situation? Or do we wait until we are asked to provide that? Now, as we think about those questions, if we were able to say, yeah, we don't do that, we're pretty good about that, then probably we're doing okay. And therefore, if we have respect in our family, that will probably also affect the way we relate to one another out in our community. However, if for any reason we had to pause a moment to think about how we might answer that question, we might want to revisit that a little bit and think a little more seriously about how we're interacting with family members, because that does impact how we react and how we treat other people in our world. Now, respect and civility are absolutely essential to have a society that functions, that works well together. And there are some indicators when we see civility, when we see respect out there. Now, one of those indicators is treating people the way we want to be treated. It means being courteous. It means being polite to one another. It has to do with being kind to the people we encounter and never, ever engage in anything like name-calling or demeaning someone else in any way, shape, or form. Something else that is an indicator is our capacity for listening to someone else. I know I've said before that listening may be the closest thing to love that any of us can ever offer another. Because when someone feels listened to and heard, they feel loved and accepted and affirmed. And it can make a huge difference. And we can't show respect. We can't be civil if we're judging. So we need to do our best to refrain from judging others to the greatest extent we possibly can. There's something else I think that is an indicator of respect in our world, and that is if we make a commitment, we keep that commitment. We don't decide that something else sounds better and we're going to do it. If we've made a commitment, it's like a promise, and we need to keep that. If we say we're going to be someplace on time at a certain hour, then we need to be there at that hour, because it's disrespectful not to be there. And it's also important that we keep our agenda out of our encounters with other people, because focusing on them is really a sign of respect. It is the ability to listen and to really put our attention on that person. Now, I wish this were as simple as I may have made it sound, but you and I know that we run into challenges every single day. For instance, what happens in the workplace if we have someone who's maybe not living up to expectations? How do we handle that? How do we have respect for someone who doesn't do what is expected of him or her? Well, it seems to me that we have to keep searching what's the good there that we can affirm, that we can honor, that we can respect. And then in a respectful way, of course, be sure to hold the person accountable for living up to the things that are requested in that case. One of the toughest things for me is when we encounter someone that we don't agree with. And to me, that's a tough one. And I don't know how you deal with it. I think sometimes I just wind up being quiet. If someone is sort of pontificating, going on and on, or just kind of pull back sometimes, and maybe I don't say anything, and I don't know that that's the right thing to do. But it seems to me that maybe the best thing to do is to try to create an environment where we listen respectfully, we really truly listen. And even if we don't agree, usually we can find some common ground there. And I guess what I'm saying is that we have to provide a safe place, that hopefully if we show that, if we establish that kind of climate, then maybe the other person will listen to us too when we share a differing kind of opinion. Well, in this whole preparation for this message today, I did find some signs of hope out there. For example, the University of Missouri has an emphasis, a focus underway on the campus there that's called Show Me Respect. Apparently, Missouri is the Show Me state, and so they use Show Me Respect. And they're trying to promote a whole climate of civility on the campus there. And you would think that if it begins on the campus, then that will continue out into the world as people move from that campus and go into other parts of their existence. And then there was another one, too. There's a website called Civility Please. And this had certain 3 or 4 very exacting things to indicate civility in our society. The first one had to do with thinking before we speak or before hitting send on an email message or anything else on the internet. So think first. That was the one thing. The second one was put cell phones away and really pay attention to the person we're with. And the third one was exchange ideas, not insults. Respect and civility are essential if we're going to have a world in which we can live at all honoring one another. We need to have respect for other religions, other nationalities, other ethnicities, other races. We need to respect ourselves and our children and our elders. We need to respect our teachers, our police officers, our firefighters, our military. We need to respect those who serve us, who work with us, who work for us in any and every way possible. To do that means we see the humanity of every other person. And it begins now. It begins here. It begins with us.